is very much challenging the hierarchy. I have a massive issue with hierarchical structures. Even where I work in most corporations, I think the power flowing from the top downwards is not the best way to do things. And for me, change would be core decision making being more inclusive and looking at who is leading those discussions and are they the right person to be leading those discussions. And I think change will come about when people acknowledge their privilege and step back or step aside. And I'm very much including myself in that because I'm queer, but first and foremost, I'm white and I'm cis and, I'm able-bodied. So I need to, be part of that movement as well. I think in terms of like thinking of trade publishing in particular, I think the way, this is a separate point, but the way kind of authors are treated, for me, that is where I want to see a lot of change. It feels like publishing profits from authors works, but the authors don't always profit in the same way. And I kind of want that balance to be redressed so it's more inclusive in that fashion as well. You mentioned about what I think is influence and change at the minute. And I think what Zainab said about organising is so important. And I think social media has been, for me, has been one of the rising kind of things where I've seen the most change happen, because it's allowed people to organise and get together and find people with similar backgrounds and experiences and kind of come together and make their voices heard. And I'm thinking of things like obviously the Me Too movement and things like that. So I think social media has been a big factor. Oh, you're on mute. The first mute of
the famous line. Yes. No, thank you all for sharing some really, really key pieces of what I would say wisdom there. And just to add a little bit from myself is that, it can feel quite lonely when you're trying to go and chase change. So, we have social media now and looking for those networks that collectively work together towards that progress piece. It's really important. But just really to have that self-belief and that courage in yourself that if you have an inner voice that wants to make something better and improve something, that you'll listen to it and try and nurture it as much as you can. That's great, thank you. So on to our second question, and some of this might have already been mentioned, but how have you seen change happen in the publishing industry? So Amy, would you like to start with that one?
Change is happening and you can see it happening. There's a number of big and small publishers, including my own, who are setting up networks for all sorts of communities. My own has a network for disabled people. We've also got I'm Dane, we've also got I'm Proud. And I think that those networks are leading to real change, or at least the promise of real change. My own has seen kind of company-wide emails becoming way more accessible. We've changed our virtual events platform to make it so that we can have captions, which is very important. And we've also welcomed allies to our meetings, and I think that's been really, really positive. It isn't all that's needed, and there are some publishers who I think will say, they've got a network and great, they've done it, they've covered us, let's leave them to it. But then there's also books like A Kind of Spark by neurodivergent author Elle McNichol, winning awards and being chosen as Book of the Year by Blackwell. So these things do really give me hope that we're on kind of the right path, but though of course it is going to be slow.
Thank you, Amy. Rebecca?
I'm thinking in terms of academic publishing, there is a large issue around accessibility, and I'm sure many of us here today have had an experience where you try to access maybe an article or research for whatever reason and it's behind a paywall, so you can't do that. And traditionally what happens is libraries subscribe to publishers, whether it's a journal portfolio or they buy their books, and that's how you can access their research. But there is a growing movement called open access. It's been around for a while, but it's really gaining momentum now. And this comes in quite a few forms, but the main route is where the institution or funder would pay the publisher to make the research free to access to the public. It comes with a few problems because it can lead to what's known as double dipping, because the publisher's charging for subscriptions but also taking money to make content open access. So it's not perfect at the minute, but it's definitely developing in the right direction. And I would really like to see a world where all research is free to access, because I don't think any research should be behind a paywall. I think it's vital that everyone should have access to that, but you can't talk about open access without considering things like internet poverty, because not everyone has that access. And is it truly open access if everyone can't access it? I'm saying the word access a lot, so sorry about that. There's been quite a few publishers that have been reluctant to engage in it because basically worrying about losing subscription income. The traditional publishing model has worked, and as we all know, and this extends to trade, if something is working in their minds, why would they change that? So again, it's been such a slow movement. But it's worth noting countries such as a lot of countries in South America have been doing open access for a long time, well over a decade, I think, very successfully. So it's kind of the Western research world that is dragging their heels a bit with this. But a lot of the core funding bodies are now saying, we will not fund your research unless you make it open access. So the big players making that change is now trickling down and enforcing that change. And I think that's kind of what you need sometimes. You need the big players to actually step up and do that. So that was kind of like what I was thinking in terms of change in academic publishing. In terms of trade, I think there's a real growth in transparency now, which I find quite exciting. Like, people are being very revealing about what happens behind publishing so that authors are more aware of this. A publisher that's really good for this is the independent publisher in Scotland, 404 Inc. They're very transparent about their budgets, their finances. They publish this kind of information. On their website, they have a list of all the books they've published, and they explain how it got published. So like, I think making all those processes transparent is, for me, one of the most exciting changes, because I think it just benefits everyone. It feels more like a community that way rather than competitors.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for bringing in that perspective of the academic publishing side. It's good to bring academic and trade together, and hopefully we can do that more. That's one of the changes we need. Zainab?
So I at Penguin work quite closely with what we call our creative responsibility team. So I suppose that's CSR in most businesses. And one of the things that I've been really encouraged by, and it's something that I've been that I've been exposed to since I was like literally 3, is actual access to books. So you know, I used to live in Lambeth Council, and I was paying my council tax to that council whilst they were shutting down libraries and turning them into gyms. And particularly over the last year, the sort of literacy gap has just exploded because kids don't have access, and adults don't have access to facilities like libraries. And with what you were talking about with the internet poverty, like even accessing digital services from libraries is incredibly difficult for some people. And that's one of the things that I have seen become a real priority, certainly at Penguin. So we do loads of work trying to distribute books where there are essentially book deserts, working with organizations who already have an infrastructure that is addressing poverty. So distributing books via food banks, homeless shelters, domestic violence refuges, and just community projects as well. And I think that's one of the things, publishing will continue to do well as long as we have like a wealthy or semi-wealthy core of people who have both the time and money to read. But that just means that we're looking down the barrel of a future where we no longer make UK culture, we make an elite culture. And that's such a depressing thought for the future. And I think that's I think both the moral responsibility and I suppose the cultural and commercial responsibility is starting to like really weigh on publishers, and they're sort of looking down the barrel like 20 years time at all these people who, you know, just an audience fading away, and that's not good for anyone. It's not good for readers, it's not good for writers, it's not good for publishers. So that's one of the, I think that's one of the things that I certainly find most motivating, is the idea that when we make books, like, they actually get to people, and that we are doing something to make that happen, and using the infrastructure available to make that happen quickly. But also, you know, hopefully we as an industry start to at some point lose some of our fear around being political as well, because we also need to fix the structures and the attitudes and the kind of social assumptions that we make that have caused this sort of environment of inequality to occur in the first place. So that's the thing, I suppose, that the change I've seen happening in the publishing industry that I think I'm most excited about, is that we actually care that people without money can read.
Thank you, Zainab. And just listening to all three of you, for me, I'm kind of hearing a common theme of accessibility from lots of different perspectives, and it's really nice to see that and bring that together and across the different publishers and the different areas of the industry. Thank you. So question 3, what changes have you been working on, and how are those projects developing? Have those projects developed? Rebecca?
So I mentioned Gold Open Access before, but what I work on at the library is what is known as Diamond Open Access. And what that means is we don't charge any fees to submit to the journals, absolutely no fees to publish in them, and absolutely no fees to access them as well. So basically the library spends a lot of money investing in that so that other people don't have to spend that money, basically. So it's a kind of a system that I'm really proud to work on. I come from a traditional publishing background. So for me, this is very different. And it kind of provides an alternative route to traditional publishing that empowers researchers, academics, and students. And it also helps with teaching and learning, which is also good. Another thing I try to work on is academia does have a bit of a reputation for being, you know, male, pale, and stale. And it is changing, but again, slowly. One thing I try and do is ensure all our editorial boards are gender balanced and geographically diverse, because historically they have been male, pale, and stale. So I've been working on that a bit as well. In terms of my publishing company, I'm in a really good position because I own it and I run it. So I kind of make the decisions, and I try to employ consultants for gaps in my knowledge as well, to try and contribute to the publishing ecosystem and to make sure I'm doing things inclusively. I think the core thing I'm trying to change, as I mentioned before, is how authors are paid and treated. I really think authors deserve to earn more money for their activities, including promotional activities for their own book. I see that as work, and I think that work should be paid. So I pay for all promotional activities. I also pay a flat fee when an author is signed, because I think they need recognition for the work they've already done on the book that was unpaid. And although I'm not currently in a position to fully compensate that, I have a token payment for that. And it also means they can start earning royalties on the book straight away. So it's not an advance. So I'm trying to do little changes that just contribute more towards an author's career so that they can make a career out of it. And yeah, I think that was it, because I think with academic and trade, there is a massive issue with unpaid labor. And I think that's one of the things I take the most issue with. And that's what I'm trying to work to dismantle bit by bit.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I think we all have a shared passion for dismantling a lot of that. Zainab, would you like to share?
I'm going to do like a quick fire 3, 2 of which are
fine.
publishing-y and 1 is a union thing. So one is so my job as brand campaigns manager, I have to think about, like, you know, what are we putting out into the world as a brand as opposed to a publisher, and we have 8, 9, I can't remember, big publishing houses who are really great at talking about books. And what I try to do with Penguin's brand marketing is actually talking about reading. And the reason that I bring that up as kind of a change that I am working on is because I think both at a societal level, but also at an industry level, we have a very limited view of what a reader is and where they come from and who they might be and what experience they might get from a book. So like certainly a massive focus that kind of started to evolve last year and is just 1, 2, 3 fire all the time for me this year is actually showing what readers look like in the world, and you know, opening up that sort of perception of who books are for, and that involves telling people stories, telling the story of any kind of reader and what impact a book has had on them. I think that's really important in terms of just having this sort of long-term chipping away effect on us as an industry. Like, you know, are we really thinking about what this country is made up of and who we're speaking to and who we're publishing for? So that's one thing. Second thing I'm very, very excited about. So I am very, very lucky, again, I'm going to mention our creative responsibility team, to work with them all of the time. And in October of 2020, we launched what I suspect is going to be a multi-year effort called Lit in Colour. And Lit in Colour is a project that is aimed at diversifying English literature teaching in UK schools, particularly in English and Welsh schools, because that's where the sort of curriculum influence is. And there is so much exciting stuff happening on that front. We are, like it's a big ambitious project, and it involves so many things. It involves providing as much support to teachers to actually implement change in the classroom as we can. It involves kind of getting authors out in front of students to incentivize them, really, to encourage them to sort of take some of that into their own hands. And it also involves empowering young people to apply the sort of collective pressure that I talked about earlier. One of the things that I've realized in the very few months that I've been working on this project is that education is basically a supply and demand business. And as much as the curriculum is centralized, the demand for how a school is run is set on the ground. And if we can convince people, A, that there is a problem with the way that English literature is taught in schools, but also B, that it's a problem worth solving because it's going to have such a positive impact, then I think that we can get teachers, head teachers, PGCE providers, school governors, students, parents, to all care enough about this to like really take it forward. So I'm really excited to see how that develops this year, because it's a big ambitious project. And then I'm going to mention a union thing, because it's what I do all of the time, which is that the last year has seen such an awesome uptick in union membership amongst people who are in publishing. And I also know that it's starting to kind of spread amongst like all of the different scales of publishing. So I know that there are some smaller independent publishers that are starting to formally unionize now. There are more union members working in publishing houses. And one of the things that I am hoping to do at the moment, I think Penguin Random House and DK are the only formally recognized unionized publishing workplaces in the UK. I'm hoping that having such an established union at Penguin and spending this year really activating the new membership to demand change is going to set an example across the industry, and that we can sit alongside other organizations like company networks like Thrive at Hachette, or cross-industry networks like the Black Agents and Editors Network, that together all of us can actually demand a standard of conduct, because we will have the collective ability to do so.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that insight, Zainab, and I'm looking forward to seeing that develop and being part of that where I can. Amy?
Yeah, so I've mentioned, sorry, stretching behind me. I've mentioned my website, the Descriptionary, and the network, Minds and Bodies at my publisher. But I'm also, as a journalist writing for a magazine, I'm pleased to see sort of changes there, or at least the information needed to make change there. So essentially, when writing an article, we have the problem of getting access to articles and research papers that Rebecca's been talking about. You would think that, you know, a journalist would be able to access the research that they want to talk about, but it's not that easy. But also we are really focusing, or have been focusing this last year, on diversity within our magazine. So not just within writers, but also if a piece is going to involve interviews, making sure that we're interviewing not just your standard kind of, you know, who people think is a scientist, which is the old guy with the, you know, crazy grey hair. And that's actually more difficult than I thought it was, because from experience trying to contact interviewees is you often get pushed from our contacts like a junior female scientist who's doing amazing work, and the juniors are often the ones who are doing the real hard work in the papers. It's just that they don't end up being the lead author on the paper. So when you try and talk to someone like that, they get, you know, imposter syndrome and say, oh no, you want to talk to my supervisor, which is generally, you know, the higher up white male. So it is kind of hard to give people the confidence to say, no, you're who we want. And we are doing that. I'm very lucky to be able to choose the main profile in the magazine most issues, and getting to focus on lots of different subjects, like interviewing Camilla Pang, who's a neurodivergent author and scientist who just won the Royal Society Science Book Prize. So I think these changes are kind of happening, and there's definitely the push for them to happen, but it's not easy. And I think just saying, you know, there are some people that will say, oh, you know, we always try and get a gender balance from the magazine, but actually when you look into it, the gender balance is them saying, right, well, we've got one quote from a woman, and we've got, you know, another male interview in the same piece, but their quotes are way longer. So it's hard, and I think we need to give the junior people the confidence to actually put their voices out there, because we need to hear them.
Thank you, Amy. I think it's just listening to all three of you again. I'm hearing that strong message of empowerment and really letting that trickle across and out to everyone, and challenging conventions and ensuring that you're persistent in that commitment to asking questions and challenging the norm. So thank you for sharing. And on to our next question. So if we are talking of change coming from within, can junior or mid-career level professionals make a difference in 2021? And if so, what would they need to do to prompt change on a larger scale? So I'm going to come back to you, Zainab.
Because you know already that I'm going to say join the union, so I'm just going to do it again. And you, Jay, unite, both appropriate. Yeah, I think so. On a more serious level, I think the mid-career thing is actually really, really interesting, because you are in a position where you are still under the hierarchical kind of structure of people who are above you and perhaps have very different priorities to you, but you also have an enormous amount of influence on the people that you're managing. And one of the things, actually, like, this is going to sound a little bit intangible, but one of the things I would love to see in publishing is sort of a bit of a charter of responsibility when it comes to what you owe the people who work for you. I think that, and I don't think this is unique to publishing, but I think that lots of people are trained or have experience in lots of really great things, but people management is something that we are all expected to just take on, and without any sort of understanding of what the responsibility of that might be, without any understanding of the pastoral responsibility that you have to the people who are lower down the kind of ladder to you, and without any understanding of the fact that, as mercenary as it's going to sound, but I say it to people because I think we need to understand, is that however much you care about your work is a transaction. You are being paid for labor provided, and you need to understand how that transaction kind of works for you in your day-to-day. So one of the things I would love to see is essentially, when you take responsibility for the development of someone who is starting out, what do you owe that person both in terms of their long-term development and their day-to-day well-being? And what do you owe the company when you are essentially managing a resource for them? And I think having just a bit more kind of professionalism around that entire dynamic would be incredible, because it would mean accountability. It would mean people not languishing in entry-level roles when their skills clearly would allow them to move further. It would mean actually having a responsibility to listen to the moral and social concerns of the people around you. So I suppose, again, like, it's just an annoying big systemic thing, but like arguing for a professional standard of relationship within companies, I think would be great. I think there's a really kind of cozy story that we tell ourselves about working in books, which is that we're all kind of like, you know, blazer wearing, elbow patch donning people sat by fireplaces with big desks, but we're not. We're a business, and we need to treat what we do with the degree of professionalism that then means that we have a higher set of standards that we hold ourselves to. So I think that's the thing, like, if you are at that level, to fight for, because it's a thing that you can reasonably say will affect your ability to work and contribute to the bottom line. And I think it's a winnable argument.
Yeah, I think that's a massively important point there, Zainab, and it's not something that people actually talk a lot about. So it's great that you've raised that. Amy, would you like to share this question?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and before I do, I just want to say how important what Zainab's saying is, that, you know, I've been in places where a manager has not understood my disability, and that directly impacts kind of everything I do, because when someone doesn't understand that by asking me to do a task, they're asking me to use from my, you know, limited energy source, like, you know, up to today, this is all I can do today, this panel. And I think it's important that you have a relationship with your manager, that you're comfortable kind of declaring that if you need to. And I'm very lucky that currently I have a manager who just understands and support me during times of flare up and stuff like that. But in terms of, you know, can juniors make change? I mean, I'm junior. I'm an editorial assistant. I'm, you know, the job title you're looking for when you're looking for an entry level, you're looking for an editorial assistant, other assistant roles. And, you know, I'm co-chair of our Publishers Network for People with Disabilities. So, of course, that's a lot of responsibility, and I'm really not suggesting that everyone goes and takes on that work, which is unpaid. But I think small contributions can absolutely lead to a larger scale of change. Allies, just speak up on our behalf. I mean, your voices outnumber ours right now, and you can change that. You can make sure that we're remembered in rooms where we're not present. And I think you don't. Sometimes when it feels like you're standing up for a community that you're not part of, you feel like, you know, you have to have all the solutions. You can't just bring problems. But I think absolutely you can. It is valid to say, when you're in your next meeting, you know, if you're doing an event, just ask, what are we doing to make this accessible? If you're reading a piece of work that talks about a particular experience that you don't have, ask yourself, you know, have we actually spoken to someone with this illness, for example, or, you know, living on the poverty line? Are we actually talking to the people who this is for and about? And I think, you know, when you're reading something, especially an editorial, if you feel uneasy about something you've read, you know, maybe someone's written deaf and dumb as a term, and you're wondering, you know, is that a term that shouldn't be used? I think people are afraid currently to ask these questions. They're afraid, you know, that they'll offend someone. In fact, I'd be more offended if you didn't raise it because you were nervous. You know, I think we need to give people a break initially. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to ask things that seem, you know, naive, but that's how we educate, and that's what needs to happen. By the way, don't use that phrase. There is, you know, a government website that's actually really useful for this sort of thing, for editorial. I think you can just Google inclusive language, words to use and words to avoid, and it'll come up. But I think first we need to allow people the space to kind of raise these issues, even if they're raising them in a way that is not, you know, ideal. I would feel more supportive knowing that allies will come out and speak for me, even if they don't exactly have the words.
Thank you, Amy. That's just like something that stood out to me there was when you said, you know, making sure that we remember the people who are not in the room when we're making those decisions. And it's something that you have to be proactive about, getting into those habits and not overlooking people. So yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. Rebecca?
Yeah, exactly what Amy said. I think we need to, in order for people to be able to be comfortable in speaking up and being heard, we need to dismantle the hierarchical structure in companies. And I think we need to normalize the awkward conversations that Amy was talking about, and just go in like, it's going to be awkward, people are going to mess up, but again, that's how you educate, like Amy said. So I think normalizing those in the workplace is really important. I think junior and mid-level staff should be able to speak up. And I have personally pointed out examples of transphobia when I've seen it, wording that I thought was going to affect people negatively with eating disorders, having recovered from one myself. I've pointed out things like that. But that's because I am gobby. So not necessarily because I've been in a workplace where that's accepted, and sometimes I've rocked the boat or made people uncomfortable. Other times people have been welcoming and said, oh, I didn't even think that at all. And, you know, people are more grateful than anything in my experience when you do speak up. But that doesn't mean speaking up is easy, because it's not in everyone's personality. They might not be empowered in their workplace. It might be actually a really damaging workplace. So I think the onus is on the people at the top and with the power to start making these changes and making sure that people are actually empowered to be able to speak up, because otherwise no one's ever going to learn anything. And this is why change is so slow, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a hit on a very important point there, is about conformity, and that if it doesn't matter if you're junior, mid-level, at a senior level, you know, you're always in a position to be a leader, and being a leader is challenging conventions and challenging conformity, and that is scary, and there's that fear of the repercussions, and just taking note of your environment, ensuring your own safety, you know, but it's tap into that courage, because you definitely have it, and, you know, find the people that you can share that with. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think we have come to the end of the panel. That time flew by. So I'm wondering if we have any time to take questions from our audience. I think there was a question about the publisher in Scotland that you mentioned, Rebecca. Was that 404 Inc?
Yeah, they're a great alternative publisher. I think their first book was called Nasty Women, and it was an anthology kind of in response to Trump, when Trump first became president in 2016. And ever since then, they've just used their platform to kind of uplift marginalized voices. And as I said, they, for me, are one of the key drivers in the independent publishing world of transparency. Like, I set up my publishing company Horn very much inspired by what they were doing. And yeah, I just want to do a big shout out for Scotland, where I'm based. I was co-chair of SYP Scotland with Sarah, who spoke earlier, and Sonali replaced me, who was amazing. And yeah, just the whole publishing ecosystem up here is just so lovely and welcoming. And I just want to give a lot of love to them all.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, I don't think we have any other questions. I think we have one for you, Amy. So Joanna said, I loved what you said about so many periods of our life when we can't do something because of mental or physical health, as that rings true from my own experience and from others I know. Do you think this needs to be a company policy shift? For example, the ability to take a duvet day style day off, days that can just be taken without booking, without explanation. So just before you answer that, Amy, I actually just wanted to share something that the organisation where I work is offering, and that's I think it's moments that matter. So if we need to take a moment, or we need to take half a day to kind of safeguard our mental health and well-being, especially in the current climate, is something that has been introduced. But yeah, I'll hand over to you, Amy, for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And those kind of initiatives are really important in just kind of reassuring employees that they can take that time if they need to. I think when we all kind of moved to this sort of working from home, everyone thought it was going to be great in terms of flexible working, but actually being ill when you're working from home is slightly different, because you know you're in the same room as the one.
Oh, have we lost you, Amy? Possibly.
Darn.
Reasonable adjustment.
Oh, you're back. Sorry, we just lost you at the end there.
Oh no, sorry, my internet's not the best.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, so reasonable adjustments are things that people don't tend to think about until someone needs one, and then everyone's scrambling to trying to figure out what they can and can't offer. So I think making sure these things are in place for everybody whenever anybody needs them is really important. But also, I don't think it just needs to be policies about taking mental health days or flexible working. I think that as a company culture, we need to understand that people can't do everything all at once, and when someone is ill, the team kind of needs to come together and then support that person, because I don't think it can just be left to, okay, they can just take one day off and then when they come back they've got 2 days worth of work to do instead of just one. So I think there's still a lot that needs to be done to make these kind of things actually effective.
Thank you, Amy. We do have a couple more questions in the chat, but I'm just wondering if we have run out of time. So if
I think we can take
can we take a few more?
Just one more, because otherwise we'll run really late.
Yeah, we'll just take one more then. So it's a question for Rebecca. How did you create your own publishing company coming from an open access background? Did you do any training in trade publishing?
Yeah, so I actually did a publishing degree at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, which was more geared towards trade than it was academic. But I went to do that course knowing I wanted to work in academic. I think there were only 2 of us in the class who wanted to work in academic. Everyone else wanted to be the poetry editor at Penguin. But I found that quite helpful, but I wouldn't say strictly necessary. I think there are other ways to get experience in trade and that knowledge. I've been a freelance editor for various small publishers, which helped build up a little bit of knowledge as well. I started speaking to people who ran their own company to get a feel of kind of how they went about it, because there are differences between academic publishing and trade publishing, and there is a difference between working for a publisher and running a company. So I paid for consultations with various people just to find out exactly how that all works, because that was a mind boggle, and tax still blows my mind. So I'm going to hire someone to help me with that as well, I think. But yeah, I don't think the open access background necessarily influenced the decision to set up the company, but it influenced how I wanted to treat everyone involved and how I wanted authors to be paid, because I think Sonali pointed out earlier that in the chat, researchers and academics aren't paid. They're expected to write and publish articles as part of their salary from the university, but they're already working 40-hour weeks and expected to do more. So it's quite a broken system. And so I did take some influence from that in my decision of how to pay authors for Horn, definitely.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we'll now bring this panel to a close. So thank you.
Sabby, before we do bring that to the close, there's just one thing that I think is really important to say, because I neglected to say it before.
Yeah, that's fine.
Change is not something that you whisper into the wind and hope comes back. It's something that you pay for. And I would just like to remind everyone, as you are going out into the industry, that the book trade grew in almost every sector last year, and everyone's got a ton of money. Okay, so if you need training, you ask for it and it gets paid for. If you want to open up a network and you need resources within the workplace for it, you ask for it to be paid for. Do not let the whole myth of publishing being sort of like the poor cousin of the entertainment industry perpetuate itself, because we had a really good year. Make them pay for the change that you want. I just wanted to point out the whole money aspect of it all.
Thank you, Zainab. I'm glad you did, because it's a massive thing to be aware of, and I think quite often across both industries, across academic and trade, it can feel like there isn't that access to resources there. So always ask, you know, expand your networks. If ask more than once, we always say ask 3 times and see what answers you get. So thank you for ending on that note. I think that's really powerful. And I would just like to say thank you to Rebecca, Zainab and Amy. It's been a complete honour to chair this panel with you all. And to everyone that's watching, just like to say take care of yourselves and keep fighting the good fight for meaningful change, you know, within you and around you, and find the people that will also help you get to the places that you want to be and see the change that you're looking for in your environment. So yeah, thank you, and thank you to SYP for having us. So I'll hand over back to SYP now.